Hi, everybody. Welcome to Ohm Radio Online. Today, my guest is Dave Ursillo. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Thank you, Stu. It's awesome to be here. Great to chat with you. I love talking about yoga. I love talking about writing, creative self-expression with you. We've been doing it for a few years now. It's felt like forever. And
Right.
I've seen quite a few beards come and go over that time. So this is like, it's all full circle. So I'm happy to be here and chatting with you again, man.
Yeah, that's the circle of life. It's beard on, beard off, and it's just the nature.
Just infinite vinyasas of beardism happening.
That's right. Hey, why don't we start off just talking a little bit about who you are and what you do, and maybe some history.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a writer by trade. It's kind of always how I introduce myself, is by saying I'm a writer, because it feels like in my heart that's what I am and who I am. My story really begins and ends with writing in a lot of ways. I started writing in high school, and I really began to develop a relationship to writing, not because I was like a literary nerd. I actually would lie about every single assigned book that I was made to read throughout, since about like fourth grade, I think. I made an art of really trying to like bullshit my way to like acting like I had read the book, and I've gotten very, very good at that. All the way through college, so there's my liberal arts education, really paying its bills. But I got into writing because I needed to have a medium to express myself, and I was always a very quiet kid, more introverted, kind of nervous, insecure. But I was a very good listener, and I could really, really always tune into people's language and hear beyond the words that they were saying. I kind of grew up in the backseat of my family car with my father, who's an attorney, and my uncle, who's a CPA, talking about law, finance, politics, two of the brightest guys that I know. And I kind of just sat in the back of that car for years growing up, listening to them talk about these things. So I became a really good listener and really being able to piece things together without knowing what the hell they were talking about. So I ended up finding writing as a way to finally put all the ideas and all the listening that I could do onto paper and make it cohesive. And I fell in love with writing as an invitational art form, like that people weren't forced to listen to a piece of paper, obviously, that they had to choose to engage it. And I found that to be really powerful. Because on a subconscious level, on a subtle level, I found that reading somebody else's writing was chosen. And I really liked the relationship to a reader, that they were choosing to read the words, and that if they weren't good enough, they would choose to not read them. So really kind of, it almost becomes like a relationship through someone you don't know when you're writing, and trying to give them something that's good enough and worthy enough of their time, effort, and energy. And, as the years went on, I ended up drifting in and out of politics, actually, and public service.
Clearly.
Where my career was heading, which was a great choice. And I'm really sorry that I'm not there right now. It seems like every 4 years, it's just like everything gets worse. As a new election cycle comes in, everyone's just like, wow, we thought that the last election was crazy. This one seems even crazier. Like, when are we going to bottom out? I'm not sure. And I left politics, and I began to write with a dream of becoming a best-selling author. And I wrote my first book, which is called Lead Without Followers, in 2011, and it was about leadership, and it was about being a leader in your life. It was kind of like my true yoga philosophy and my just life philosophy. The book itself was not a very good book. It was written 5 years ago. I think the ideas were pretty good, but it was not a good first try for a self-published book. And in the wake of my first book, which I published in September 2011, I thought, this is clearly going to be a best-selling book. There's no way that it's not going to, launch me into, speaking gigs for that I can charge, $5 or $10 grand for. Everything's going to be easier after I self-publish my first book, which was not good. So surprisingly, that didn't come about. And in the wake of my first book, I finally got into yoga. I had been dabbling in P90X yoga, the DVD. A lot of people, that was their entry point.
Sure.
And got comfortable enough with my Crescent Lunge and Warrior One to go with a friend who took me to my first yoga class in San Diego. I went back home to Rhode Island. I've been traveling a little bit to promote the book, which wasn't selling and no one was reading. So that was a good trip, very worthwhile experience. And I went back home. I started getting into yoga again, and the rest, as they say, is history. I'm now certified registered yoga teacher with Yoga Alliance. I've been teaching for almost 2 years now. I just got back from hosting my very first yoga and writing retreat in Costa Rica. I had hosted another retreat that Stu was still kind enough to come and join in Rhode Island a couple of years ago, but I wasn't a teacher then. So this is the first one I was actually like fully teaching at. And yeah, now my life, the work that I do is I'm a professional storyteller. I'm still a writer, but I'm also a writing coach. I run an online writers group to help people express themselves. So this crossroads of creative self-expression and yoga, both different forms of expressing oneself and kind of different ways to get into a sense of wholeness within. And I believe when you finally practice that sense of self and self-awareness, but self-activation and self-reliance, that you're fully able to step into a role of service and giving. And the two are pretty bound in one another. And I think the more that you can be in your own personal yoga, the more that you can be of service, contributing to the world in your work, whether it's entrepreneurial, startup, freelance, or as a yoga teacher. So I see the two as different forms of self-expression and embodiment, and I like to knit those two together to help people kind of look at themselves in different ways.
Is that how the philosophy that you learned during TT affected maybe the direction of your business?
Yeah, you know what? It's like the philosophy that I learned in my teacher training program, like all of the yoga, especially the Bhagavad Gita, which I know you're a big fan of.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's a pretty decent book. It's lasted a few years. Lasted longer than my first book 5 years ago. Go figure. But I would say so. I would say it's this relationship that's inclusive and not exclusive. That the self and others, and doing your soul's work and healing your karma and contributing to the world in your ways is so interconnected to the dharma of like the service-minded purpose that you're kind of moving within the world. And I think for a long time, for me, coming from a background of leadership, I almost had like a service-first mentality, where I thought that to be the best leader or giver that you could possibly be is like you need to make everybody else the priority at all times. Like that was the pure form of leadership in my mind. And the more that I've come into yoga, the more I've realized that the relationship to the self is so important, because this is your only opportunity that you have in this lifetime. It's like this body, this experience, this viewpoint, even this ego, this identity. And that being in the best relationship that you possibly can be to yourself is the way to become the best leader, giver, servant, helper, teacher that I think you can be. And I see the two really being very closely interconnected, whereas for a while I found that I would almost think of them as separate or conflicting.
You talked about service. Did the concept of seva change anything in the way you looked at service, or what that idea of service kind of meant?
Yeah, I think so. I think that right now, as I've become a teacher, I use the word service a lot, but I almost don't like the word service very much.
Yeah, screw service.
Huh? It's true though. Like service has this. Well, I'll branch into my Catholic roots, having grown up Catholic. And I know the word service is used a ton in a lot of different ways, but in different like Christian leadership circles, service is used. The word service is used to mean like what I just was describing, that I used to have a conflict with, which was like everybody else first. Mm-hmm. And I don't actually believe that that's the right mentality, like everybody else first, because I do believe that there's a symbiosis to like giving and receiving. So as the self, as an individual teacher, I think my biggest practice has been to receive more and to feel worthy and deserving of accepting thanks and gratitude from students, not because it's about me, not because without me they would suffer. It's not like a selfish way of receiving, but I think it's when you're in a position of teaching and as a yoga teacher, to truly be giving to people, to be serving them, I think you need to be in service to yourself too. I think you need to be knowing yourself so well that when you walk into the room to teach people, to give them their yoga, you need to be very deliberate and disciplined and not in where you draw the lines and boundaries, in where you see people and hear people and allow them the space to cry on their mat or to ask you questions for 15 minutes after class. And so in a way, I think that what I've learned as a yoga teacher, that being of service to people in the classroom is to further divorce myself from their experience, but at the same time, it's made me the best teacher that I possibly can be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Do you feel like that there's maybe an ebb and flow to the idea of what you give and what you receive as a teacher? And
yeah.
A corollary to that, do you believe that becoming a teacher was the next step on your personal yoga path?
Yeah, let's start with the second question. I think so. I think at the time when I became a yoga teacher, I made the decision almost 3 years ago to study, and it was because the opportunity came up with two teachers that really got me into yoga, and I wanted to learn from them. And also there was a great group of people who were going to be doing the training. So I knew that the curriculum was good, the teachers were good, and the people I wanted to be around, and just establishing these like localized friendships and connections with people after just having moved back to Rhode Island. This was in 2013, late 2013, when I was about to start my teacher training. And so the time was right, but I really wanted to take my understanding of yoga to a much deeper level. Like, I had been moving beyond the physical practice.
So you mean more than the asana?
More than the asana, exactly. And I knew that there was so much to the healing art. I wanted to learn more about the body, about chakras and subtle energy, and how different things manifest themselves in the body as physical pains or sensations when it's mental or emotional. So all the mind-body connection, the philosophy of Hindu mythology and the true roots of yoga, and all the misconceptions that can be around that. And it was time for me to become a teacher. And I had the back of my mind, I was like, I think I will teach people yoga. But for me personally, it was wanting to learn more, wanting to get more serious and almost like professional with my understanding of yoga, more committed and responsible to it. And
that's a better phrase. That's a better phrase, committed and responsible than professional.
Yeah, I think it's better than saying professional, but it's kind of like that mentality, like just taking it more seriously than a hobby. Like I wanted it to become an art form that I practiced, much like with my writing. It's not always glorious, but you know, when you put your work out there, it makes you take it really, really seriously. Like self-publishing a not so great first book, and then 4 others after that were incrementally better, it's kind of like it pushes you, it ups the ante. And every time I step into the studio now, I want to teach a better class than the last one. It doesn't always happen, but I'm constantly reaffirming my dedication and commitment to these art forms, which I think almost have like lives of their own. And it's a real gift to be able to give them to other people and welcome them into their own relationship to yoga or to writing.
Yeah, so you see a parallel between those two practices, the writing and the yoga?
I do, and like starting with the very literal way, the space of the mat and the space of a blank page, I consider them to be canvases through which you can explore and express yourself. When I was first getting into yoga, I found that most times I would get to the mat, I kind of have like a lingering like authority problem that I'm trying to work through, this karma, and having a teacher tell me what to do for no reason, like a really nice teacher who I like, being like, step into warrior 1, in the back of my head I'd be like, don't tell me what to do. Like it's like really, 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 really mature. But I went to yoga to challenge that voice, that narration, that habit, and also because it was kind of like the same thing that I would tell myself when I was being a writer or being a creative, working for myself, which is like the avoidance issues, right? Like the struggle of showing up and doing the things you don't want to do because a voice in your head tells you you don't want to do it, or someone, whatever. There's the different scripts and narration. Whenever I go to the studio and practice and be told by someone and also hear the narration in my head of what I did or didn't want to do, it made me a better creative. It made me a better a self-employed creative entrepreneur because I would be able to better identify those scripts and those narratives. So that was, yeah, that's like the first way that it really kind of all started to come together for me.
You talked about wanting to learn. I'm just taking a step back. You
Sure.
talked about wanting to learn the way kind of our emotional practice affects our physical practice, with the idea of koshas in yoga. Have you been able to use that kind of idea while you're working with people in the writing space or even in the leadership space?
Yes, I have, and never very directly, but for example, when I'm working with writers, I found when I first started my online writers group, which is called the Literati Writers, I founded that in 2013 as well. So I was doing that right when I was about to start my yoga teaching journey. But at the time, like over the following couple of years, I noticed a very similar pathway that all of my writing clients, who I would describe as conscientious creatives, they're writers and they're creatives, but they're not this like militant, I want to hustle and burn through hundreds of thousands of words for the rest of my life. They wanted their writing journeys to be rewarding and fulfilling, which says a lot about their personal values, their guiding beliefs.
Sure.
But I noticed a very similar trajectory where they would struggle, how quickly they would settle into the space of the online writers group, at what point they would get really comfortable with expressing themselves from a place of desire and feel, and then ultimately starting to like alchemize all of this reflection, learning, and growth through writing to a new sense of self, and like a healthier sense of self where they would oftentimes start to describe themselves as writers for the very first time. And as I went through my yoga training, I was able to kind of draw out a rough guideline where all of these things were kind of mimicking the chakra system, from the root chakra, from Muladhara to Svadhisthana to Manipura, and then ultimately to Anahata, and like opening up the heart space and finally like stepping into that place of service. So I found it really, really fascinating, and I guess it just makes sense because you could transfer like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we're more familiar with in Western culture and taught in school more deliberately than in the Hindu chakra system, but that like foundational needs come first, getting comfortable, rooted, having your needs met, feeling safe in a protected environment online or in person. Then, once the safety is instilled, to be able to express yourself more openly because you feel like you're not being threatened, and what feels good, what do I like, what do I want, ultimately to the place of being able to get comfortable enough with your self-expression to be like, this is more of who I am, this is what I'm learning, and this is what I have to give to others. It's really neat to kind of note those pathways. So I do more and more deliberately teach writers about the energetics of what I would call the energetics of self-expression, because it mirrors the energetics of doing anything. And so that's another example of how the yoga like really deliberately like illuminated something that I was noticing already in people. And once the pieces came together, it made it a lot easier to kind of teach it and reflect it back to people.
So, I don't want to put words in your mouth. It sounds like within learning more about the kind of history and teachings of yoga that you were able to create create words to help kind of define what you were already seeing within the practice, the writing guide, the writing teaching that you were already doing. Is that?
Yeah, it did. I think it's just when the yoga teaching, going through teacher training, which is a very good teacher training, was really centered in all the traditional teachings and philosophy of yoga, helped me it illuminated so much because it was such a it's so similar to so many different philosophies that we're more familiar with in the West, in American culture, in Western culture, and I related it because Hinduism and the roots of yoga were something that I never really studied. It was like the one religion, one spirituality, one history that I never really studied in school, in any amount of school. Whereas I had studied a lot of Eastern cultures, from Confucianism to Taoism, to Zen Buddhism, to Tibetan Buddhism, Islam, all the forms, all the branches of Christianity, and even some of like different, different like pagan and traditions. And Hinduism was always like the odd one out, and which is really interesting because more and more of the next decades, I feel like that's going to change because India is a rising player on the global stage, and I think as yoga becomes more popular, people are interested in knowing like what the roots are of India and Indian culture and tradition, as well as yoga, Hindu mythology, the Hindu spirituality. So I found so many different parallels as I learned more about Hinduism, as I learned more about yoga philosophy, it struck me as like the yoga is what everybody else is striving for, which is just wholeness.
Yeah.
And understanding that the mind and the ego don't present everything as honestly as we'd like to believe, or at least we grow up believing. And that in this philosophy of yoga, just like I believe every religion is essentially trying to teach this same core principle that you need to step out of the soul perspective that you're seeing life and yourself through, and when you step back from it and almost like observe yourself from a bird's eye view, like a very Eckhart Tolle observing your thinker sort of way to detach from the mind, you start to see that everybody's just trying to drive towards the same goal, which is finding the wholeness and leaving the illusions, the Maya, behind. And so the yoga teaching like really reaffirmed all of that, and I was able to make all these different connections. It's just like looking at the same center point from a new angle,
Yeah.
And it really reaffirmed a lot of what I had believed and hoped to believe, that we're all striving towards those same goals.
So I teach that kind of concept when I'm teaching ego pose. The idea of looking from above, right?
Right.
So to put you on the spot, give me a story that you use, maybe a Hindu story that you use to kind of illustrate one of these philosophies, either to a writing group or to a yoga class.
Absolutely. Well, I use one of the things that I'll do is I'll teach a workshop every once in a while about the warriors of Hindu mythology, and I really like these three stories. I won't tell all three of them, but I'll give you the archetypes that I teach in this workshop and in this class. These three different archetypes of Hindu mythology, Hindu warriorship, I guess we could call it, as I see it. And the three archetypes are Arjuna, who is the warrior experiencing a great crisis of identity and really, really questioning everything on the eve of the biggest battle of his life, and who has to like do his dharma, like do his damn dharma, as me and my friends say, of kind of like put up, shut up, put in the work, and don't give up on the path now. That's the first like warrior archetype that I see that a lot of people I think can resonate with, which is
Sure.
You're on a career path, you're in a relationship, things get rocky, you're starting to doubt everything all of a sudden, or even creatively you're on the edge of publishing your book, and all of a sudden you're like, this book is shit, and I don't want to publish it, and everyone's going to hate me, or I don't want to be a writer anymore. Like you're right on the edge, and you're like, everything to this point told me to be here, and now you're having that doubt. That's the kind of like the great warrior who is still human, I think, is Arjuna. The second warrior, and I like this story. Most of my classes, as you can imagine, Stu, probably the same for you. Most of my students tend to be women, and we're living in an awesome time where I think that finally, the feminine force of our civilization is like starting to make strides to catch up to like us terrible dudes,
Right.
and thank God for that, because we need them more than ever. And I just was wearing not long ago my "The Future Is Female" T-shirt, which I like to teach in from time to time too. But one of my favorite stories of Hindu mythology is the creation story of Durga, and Durga's slaying of the evil Mahisa. I know he goes by a number of different names: Mahishura, Mahisa, and I love the Durga story because she's a warrior who was created with a sole purpose, which was to kick ass.
Yeah.
Like, she was created to destroy a demon, and she was the only one who could do it. And I love reminding students that there's times when you need to, like, be Durga and just, like, get that shit done. And there's no room for doubt or debate, and you need to, like, really blow through the obstacle that's in your way and channel, like, all the strength to move through it. And then finally, I think the ultimate goal for each of us is to be the warrior like Hanuman, and to be a warrior of great devotion and service, like we've been talking about. And I love the Hanuman stories because he is divine, he is part God, he has great powers, but he doesn't remember it. Yeah. And, there's some stories that say he was been cursed because he, was taking advantage of his powers as a child, so they gave him short-term memory. The gods gave him short-term memory so that he wouldn't take advantage and fly around and try to bite the sun and eat a star and all these different things. So Hanuman truly is like every human being in that we forget our divine nature. And maybe we can't jump across an ocean, but the stories of Hanuman are whenever he summons his faith, his devotion, his love for his friends, his service to his friends, that he finds this sudden strength and ability to do these incredible superhuman things. And I think that's it's such a fitting way to get grounded and centered in whatever you're trying to do, which is, we're all infinitely capable of doing different things creatively in yoga, in the world. But it's like, what is the motivating force behind where you're going? And I think that when you summon the service and devotion and faith and giving to people, that's such a great force for doing great things, because you never need another excuse than that. You never need another rationale or a defense other than it's because it was from a place of love and giving, and you wanted to go there because you thought it would help people. And it's a nice way to have, it's a great excuse for when anything goes wrong, or you write a bad book, or, the yoga workshop doesn't go well. It's just like, I was trying to give to people, but, it keeps you honest, I think. And those are the stories that I like to tell.
Cool. Hey, I really want to thank you for taking the time and really just doing such a beautiful job of explaining how the back end of yoga really does apply to life and where we are now, and giving examples of yourself. I appreciate it, Dave.
Absolutely.
Thanks again for just being on the show. And Dave Ursillo, you can find him at daveursillo.com and the LiteratiWriters.com, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, thank you, Stu. I really appreciate you having me on. It's always awesome to chat. Look forward to speaking with you again real soon.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Take care.